stagnation through the rapid inflation of our currency along the lines of what happened after the '73 Arab oil embargo?
That's a great one. I mean, that's deeply disturbing. And how many of you share that fear? That we just become stagnant? I think that's a great one. And I guess if we think about that too specifically, so are you thinking, now put me in your head here, are you talking about, you're fearful about job creation and those kind of things that become stagnant and that it's difficult to get jobs?
Yes, sir. I'm not so much worried about me because I'm worried about most other people, because there's a lot of people who will drop out of high school, will have less than a high school degree, and a lot of people who have a high school degree, and people who have less than a bachelor's degree who are going to have the most hardest time, because they're the ones that are getting laid off in this economy, people, the least skilled workers. And so I'm most worried about them. I'm most worried about rampant unemployment problems along the lines of Europe.
Mm-hmm. That's a valid concern. A related issue I have here too now. I'm going to have to talk my way through this before you all start throwing stuff at me. Things like the minimum wage laws, these are horrible. Because if you think about what you're doing with the minimum wage laws, the people at the bottom, they need money, no question about that, but what they really need are skills. They don't get the skills if you knock the bottom rungs of the ladder off.
Or I have $5 and $2.
Yeah, and if I can just stretch the point for a minute. I was on a radio show a few weeks ago, and somebody was saying, but Mike, you can't live on $5 an hour. I know that's really tough. Okay, but it's even worse when you're living on $0 per hour. You've got to have a job. And I said, well, they were still arguing with me. And I said, wait a minute. I said, give me just a second. Just think about this. Could we help the poor by raising the minimum wage to $50 an hour? Hey, that would help the poor. Would it? No, now none of us would have a job. Are you all with me on that? Unless you happen to be $50, if you work $50 per hour. But go back to my ladder again. You're already way up on the rungs. If you knock those lower rungs out, people don't have a chance to even get started. I mean, think about what a lot of us did, and maybe some of you did just a few years ago. I did it a century ago. But when I was a teenager, I just wanted a job to get some basic skills. And are y'all with me on that? Sure. Put on my resume. It wasn't a lot, but it was a little bit of something. Well, now we're taking that away from the people. Okay? And I go back to, again, you should be able to hire somebody if they want to work for you. Because they probably want the skills more than they do the money. They know they're not going to have a long time career on $5, $6, $7 an hour.
I think one of my bigger concerns is just how our culture has become twisted so that we don't really care about those things anymore. I mean, look around you, there's not a lot of people here. In terms of politics, either people are Republicans or they're Democrats and they vote straight Republican or straight Democrat, or they just don't care. And I think the problem that I have is the gigantic proportion of people who just simply don't care what government does and let it do whatever they want. I think that's the antithesis of what the founding fathers spoke of when they talked about civic virtue. Mm-hmm. And when our society is getting to that state, I don't think our government is ever going to be efficient or fixed or any of that until those people start caring.
That's a great thought. And again, I talked about the Republican form of government. If you look at that word, the word public is in it. Yeah, if the public doesn't participate, that's what you need in a Republican form of government. Can we just stick with that issue for a minute? What do you all think about? What do you think the apathy is about? Yes, ma'am.
I'm not as young as the rest of us here, but what concerns me a lot, and I'm in the 50s now, is that over the 70s, 80s, 90s, and on, I've seen an attitude that the government is going to take care of everything and take care of all of our problems. Mm-hmm. It seems to have gotten worse with each decade.
Yeah, I agree. it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the Tocqueville. 200 years ago, people didn't even think that way. Well, there's a problem, the government will fix it. No, they're here to provide military, police, and court system. You're absolutely right. So, but what do you think about those last two questions? And what do you think is driving that? Why do we have the apathy, and why do we have this deterioration of self-responsibility? And this is not a trick question. I don't have the answer to it. But what do you think is actually happening here?
Well, freedom has its own cycle. When you are free, you don't have to care. You don't have to take the time and initiative to research the topics. So in a way, we're kind of condemning ourselves or damning ourselves in the long run by giving people freedom. I mean, of course, we want to give them freedom in the end. But in itself, it comes with the ability to not be forced to research this stuff, not have to research.
To the point where you have to start over again. Like revolutionary.
I feel like people feel like they can't really affect change in government. Like, no matter what they do, it's going to expand more and more and do more and more things regardless of how they care about or what they think about it. And so what's the point in voting if my candidate won't win or this bill won't be?
People don't have a sense of political advocacy anymore. They don't think that they can make any change.
Interesting.
And they feel that the government has so much power that no matter what they do,
Does that have to do a lot with the size, do you think? Because I think the government's just immensely big now. I remember when I actually grew up in Baltimore, and I used to tell people, Washington was smaller than Baltimore. I know I'm dating myself here, because Washington's the fourth largest city now. They produce nothing. Doesn't that disturb you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember when Baltimore was like twice, Washington was just like a little tourist trap. You go over and you look at some statues and you buy expensive hot dogs and you go back to Baltimore and eat good food. Okay, but if you think about the size of the government is so intimidatingly big now. And that's good feel again.
Oh, I was going to say something. People are apathetic because of their image of government. One, because of the way the media portrays it as politicians are corrupt individuals that break all these laws, that get by with everything, that steal money from special interest groups, and also they feel aloof. Politicians are up here, people are down here, and people don't understand it. People think that politicians are above human, and they're not. People have a bad image of politics.
also the distribution of social violence plays into that. Because, the wars down here and middle class here, and because of the ability for government to raise taxes and stuff, the middle class is being shoved down closer to the poverty level, and the rich stay up here, and it's just a never-ending battle.
I'm not sure which one.
Go ahead.
Okay, I lost track.
On top of everyone else, I think some of it has to do with education because, and I don't hear this as much now as I did back in high school in a small town, but is that people will say, well, what goes on in Washington, what's that got to do with me? But I don't think people realize that if the government passes this health care bill, that's going to take away their right to health care and free choice.
Yeah.
They don't realize that when the government forms a new tax or increases a tax, that's going to be more money out of their paycheck. I think that people just don't care about something they don't realize affects them so much. People are more concerned with their favorite sports team or what they're going to do this weekend than they are with what goes on in government. And I think it's because they don't realize how powerful it is. What it can do to them.
Let me make a quick comment on health care. I promise not to go off on a tangent about health care. We about out of time? We're okay. I was on another radio show a couple of days ago, and somebody said, well, don't you agree that health care is a mess? Well, yeah, I agree with that. But if you think about why it's a mess, just go back to basic economics. The government has stimulated demand by making it appear that it's free or cheap, and then restricted supply. Now think about how that works in economics, and think about what I think is the way you're going. What Obamacare is going to do. demand is going to be driven dramatically higher. What's going to happen here?
Shortage.
Yeah,